Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dubai. Welcome to the Global Education and Skills Forum. Once more, a round of applause for those children. The photo needs changing. I look a bit fat. This event, this fourth event that we organize in Dubai, could not have been possible without the support of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and ruler of Dubai. The support we receive from him and his executive office make sure that we deliver a phenomenal experience to all of you, our guests. In addition to them, I want to recognize a few other individuals at the start. The first, obviously, being Sunny Varkey, the founder of our organization. We also have a few other dignitaries that I should mention at the front of this program. We have, alongside the many education ministers that we have, the many UN colleagues that have come, we also are fortunate to have the Deputy President of Kenya and the Deputy Prime Minister of Jordan. We thank them for making the time to be with us. Friends, over the last year, we have seen a massive change in the way the world talks about education. In the year 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were passed, and in 2015, when they came to an end, 58 million children were still out of school. That is not acceptable. But last year, what happened was one of the sponsors of this conference, the Education Partners, revealed some research that has made me think a lot. They said that out of the 7 billion population of this world today, 500 million children today are in failing schools. 500 million children today in failing schools. That's a huge number. I find it difficult to stomach such a massive injustice that is taking place in our systems of education. So when we think about that, we thought, well, why not address that at this conference? In conversation with Andreas Schleicher, who is speaking later on today, we thought that we should, whether we are private, and I just don't mean private education providers, I also mean business, whether it's government, the public sector, whether it's teachers, whether it's the NGO or the social sectors, need to convene and have this discussion as to how do we collectively take greater responsibility for public education? Because we believe that that has to be strengthened. It is unjust that so many children today are in these schools that are failing. And these are official government statistics. It's not something that I make up in front of you. So in preparation of this conference, we went around the world and spoke to a number of different partners. And these partners have helped us think through what we should be focusing on. I'm delighted to have and announce a number of partners for this conference who will join me shortly on stage. But more importantly, it's how we have come together to think about, how is it that we present to you over the next 2 days through the content that we have, all the speakers that have come together, this subject. So I'm pleased that in a departure to last year, we have a few statistics that I want to put in front of you. The first is that this conference has resulted in over 3,000 applications to attend, of which 1,600 of you are here. There are 110 countries from every letter in the world, apart from the letter V, who are represented. There are some 22 education ministers who are here with us today. There are 61 sessions, public sessions that you can participate in, as opposed to 35 last year. There are 145 speakers this year. And friends, 80% of these are new. Please take the opportunity to speak to them and get their insights as to how you collectively strengthen public education. There are 118 media organizations and journalists. Please mind, especially the political leaders, that every single conversation is on the record. There are 219 of our staff, my colleagues, are involved in this event, and we have some incredible formats which I'll speak to you about later on today. Friends, please join me in welcoming our organizational partners to the stage. So these partners range from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Please, round of applause for them. The UN Youth Advocacy Group. ADEA, which is the voice of Africa in education. The Asia Society. The Inter-American Development Bank. UNESCO. Education International, which is the Global Federation of Teacher Unions. And Tsinghua University. In specific, I'd like to thank UNESCO and Dubai Cares for being with us at this conference and partnering with us over the last 4 years every year. Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our partners. Please. Without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker for today. Fareed Zakaria, for those that do not know him, and needs, frankly, no introduction, appears on our TV sets every day. He's the host of a program called CNN GPS, and more than that, he's a friend of ours. What we value most from him and what we've asked him to do today is to talk to us about the global landscape. And I just don't mean in terms of education. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. And it helps having someone like you here, Fareed, who will hopefully present to the audience over here and our guests what the implications for all of us are going forward. Please welcome Fareed Zakaria to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vikas. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be back here. I've watched this conference grow from an idea that Sunny had years ago into what has really become the kind of Davos of education for the world. And I think that the only adjustment I would make to that is that the production values are a little bit higher than Davos, so maybe it has to be called the Oscars of the education world if we keep going in this direction. I find myself in an awkward position right now because as somebody who is American, who lives in America and is involved in the American political debate, it is very awkward to come outside the United States and give any kind of lectures about democracy and how things are going to the rest of the world. I feel as though you are all watching what has really become the greatest reality television show in human history in the American presidential debates. I don't know whether it was the low point of the presidential campaign because there are still 8 months to go, but certainly up to now one would have to say that to watch Senator Marco Rubio when aspiring for the great office once held by George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower, explained that the great problem he had with the front runner was that he had small hands, and that this implied that he was limited in another dimension, seemed bad enough. But then to have Donald Trump raise it in a debate, not to point out that this was a tremendous debasement of rhetoric, but to point out that it was not factually accurate, seemed to me to be probably the lowest point we've gotten to yet. But as I say, we have 8 months to go. On the Democratic side, it's much less interesting. One has to confess, though I did think that there was a line by the American comedian Bill Maher, which captured it nicely. Watching Hillary Clinton's challenges, he said, Hillary, we keep trying to make this easy for you. The last time we had you run against a black guy with a Muslim name with the word Hussein in the middle of his name. This time, we've got you up against a 74-year-old socialist Jew. How much easier can we make this for you? So I think that the entertainment will continue. Unfortunately, this is the world's leading power, so it at some point will not be so funny anymore. But I do think that what Donald Trump represents and what Bernie Sanders represents is an enormous amount of anxiety about what is happening in the world right now. And I think we have to take that into account when we think about what is going on in the world. This is an age of anxiety. This is a period of anxiety. And it is a period of anxiety, I would argue, because there's an enormous amount of disruption, dislocation, dispossessment taking place. Look, you see it in the Middle East, right? More dramatically than anywhere else. But if you look at the Middle East and you think back to 30 or 40 years ago, the Middle East was relatively stable, in fact, very stable. And now, from Libya to Syria, the whole place is highly unstable, up in flames. Why? There are many complicated reasons for it. 30, 40 years ago, that stability was bought because you had highly repressive dictatorships from Libya to Syria that were in place. But it does seem to be the reality that there is a great deal of anxiety that is expressed in a variety of forms, in a variety of places. You think of Egypt and the Arab Spring. You think of Tunisia and Morocco. You look, of course, at Syria. And that, when coupled with low state capacity, seems to be a kind of recipe for deep instability. So the most interesting thing about these countries in the Middle East that have gone through great instability is that when you got rid of the strong man at the top, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, what it turned out is that there was no state underneath. There was no administrative structure that had any capacity to maintain social and political order. That when you looked beneath it, there was very little in terms of civic organizations that could maintain some kind of social cohesion. And in that atmosphere of chaos, what happens is people start moving back to their oldest identities. And those identities are not national identities in the Middle East, because the nation state in many cases was created only 100 years ago by the British and French. These are identities much older than that: Shia, Sunni, Arab, Turkmen, Kurd. And in that political chaos, people have retreated to those identities. And that has, of course, made any kind of compromise or stability even more difficult, because these identities are necessarily pitted up against other identities. And you see this most dramatically, of course, in Syria. But that's one piece of the story. Here's another part of the story that seems to me as important to look at. Look at the Gulf states. Look at the manner in which Egypt has been able to restore stability. Look at the fact that you still have an extraordinary degree of economic stability and continuity throughout the Middle East. So much so that here's the most puzzling part about what has happened. In the last 3 years, the large parts of the Middle East have become much more unstable, and yet the price of oil has not gone up, it has gone down. Right? If 3 years ago you would have said Syria will collapse, Iraq will collapse, Libya will collapse, what will the price of oil be? Everyone would have said it would go to $200 a barrel. But it didn't, because there are other things going on in the world. And this is the most important point I want to make, which is that we are living in a two-track world. So while you see the flames in the Middle East, in parts of the Middle East, why is it that the price of oil went down? Because there were much larger forces outside the Middle East which were powering it. The two great engines that have determined what have happened with the price of oil has been the engine of American supply. America went from producing 10 years ago 1 million barrels of oil a year to producing this year 9 million barrels of oil a year. The United States now produces more liquid hydrocarbons than Saudi Arabia, more liquid hydrocarbons than Russia. The second great engine, of course, has been the decline in Chinese demand as the Chinese economy has slowed. And those two forces have overwhelmed any of the concerns about political instability in the Middle East. And it raises this larger point, which is there are many different forces at play in the world. Yes, you have had something going on in the Middle East. But these larger engines are much more important. And if you step back and look at these larger engines, what you see is a much more mixed picture than one of just doom and gloom. Look at what is happening in this part of the Middle East, where progress continues despite an extraordinary decline in oil prices. Look at what's happening in a place like Latin America, where 30 years ago, 35 years ago, you were looking at a land of dictatorships and juntas. Now you have consolidated democracies that are increasingly reformist and pro-trade and pro-market. Look at what is happening in Africa, where you have gone from a land of Mobutus and Idi Amins to a land where the governments of Kenya, Ghana, and many, many others show extraordinary promise and again are moving in the right direction. The pace may not always be right, but look at the direction of the arrow. Look at Asia, where India has elected a pro-reform, pro-business government that is trying to do considerable administrative reform. Look at Indonesia, by the way, the largest Muslim country in the world, in which a pro-reform former businessman, former mayor has been elected president. Look at Japan, which has probably the most reformist prime minister in 20, 25 years. Look even at China, where the government of China is trying to figure out a way to make the kind of economic reforms which would set its economy on the right track, move away from a total reliance on exports and investment toward consumption. Again, you can always find a play, the pace is not right, they may have promised more than they have delivered, but in every one of these cases, the arrow is moving in the right direction. In fact, it's very difficult looking around the world today to find a place where you have seen a major regression, a major backward movement. And that's extraordinary when you consider that we just had the worst financial and economic crisis since the Great Depression. So in that context, you still have forward movement. But you have pressures. And this is where I talk about a two-track world. You have pressures that are developing because growth is not being shared equally, growth is not happening in the same places, and that is producing enormous economic, political, and cultural anxiety. So the two great forces that are shaping our world, without any question, are globalization and technology. You see it with the massive expansion of the global market that has taken place in the last 20 or 30 years. And you see it with the way in which the internet and the information technology has totally transformed our world. Right? The number of countries that are growing successfully in the world has tripled. In 1979, the number of countries growing at 3% a year was about 32. The number of countries growing at 3% a year or more, even today, in this low-growth environment, is about 80. So that extraordinary transformation in which so much of the world has started to take part in a single global economy and system continues. On the technology front, I don't have to tell you, but just keep in mind how recent this transformation is. All the devices that you now use and regard as absolutely essential to living your life, the iPhone, the smartphone, the tablet, the laptop, the internet, none of this existed in 1990, right? You might wonder sometimes how people did business in 1990 when you had access to none of this stuff. You might wonder how your children spent occupied their time when they didn't have the opportunity to text. But somehow life went on. We had none of these devices, and now we are at the beginning of this extraordinary information revolution that is only accelerating. And these two forces have powered the world, but they have also dislocated it. And they have dislocated it in ways that are very difficult to appreciate. Because for many of the people here, you sit at the top of these two tracks. And you are doing fine because you have a high degree of education and you have access to capital. And if you have a high degree of education and you have access to capital, you're going to surf this world very well. You're going to find opportunities. You're going to find your skills are in greater demand. And you're going to find that the world becomes your oyster because there are more and more countries, larger and larger networks, and more technology that you can use in a way to force multiply your talent. But what happens to people who are not quite in that position? Those people find that technology and globalization act like a pincer movement, pushing down their wages, pushing down their opportunities. So if you're a car worker in the Western world, you face this reality. If you're a steel worker, you face this reality. But increasingly, you are going to face this reality in China and India as well. Here's the really interesting thing that is happening with technology and globalization. You look at new factories being built in China or in India. What is striking about them is massively increased output. So if they were making 100 widgets in the old factory, they make 1,000 widgets in the new one, but with many fewer people. I asked an Indian industrialist, why, labor is cheap in India. He said, that's not the problem. The issue is, in order to meet global specifications for quality now, everything needs to be automated. The machine has to do it because the human being introduces too many errors into the system. And so even in places like India and China, what you are finding is you have to find ways to upgrade people's skills, because they are going to have to work with technology to much, much higher standards than has been true before. That is why, by the way, after 7 years of growth in India and Africa, manufacturing as a share of the GDP has actually declined, not increased. This is a very new phenomenon. First time you are seeing it in developing economies. As they develop, the percentage share of manufacturing is actually declining. And what that tells you is you are going to face a new set of challenges now. And these challenges are going to be much more substantial than the ones we've faced. Look at Google's driverless car, right? This is amazing technology. You look at it and you say to yourself, maybe 20 years from now, people will wonder, why did we ever do something as dangerous as driving? Why did we ever allow human beings to do something that was this dangerous, right? Because the Google car never gets drunk, never gets lost, never has to worry about it being too dark, never misses a turn. And by the way, 300,000 people around the world die in automobiles every year. So this is a huge saving. But think about this. In the United States, the single most common occupation for a man is driving a car, bus, truck, or taxi. Single most common occupation. So what is that person going to do if you end up in this brave new world of driverless cars? This is, in some ways, the heart of the problem that Donald Trump is exploiting, that to a certain extent Bernie Sanders is exploiting, that nationalist parties in Europe are exploiting. Because once you face this circumstance in which your life is being disrupted, dislocated, dislodged, it's a very, very powerful force. And people want to understand what's happening. And frankly, they are very susceptible to the simple answer, guess what? Your life sucks and it's not your fault. It's the fault of Mexicans and Muslims and Chinese and Japanese. Donald Trump keeps railing about the Japanese because I think, in the 1980s when he first became prominent as a businessman, the Japanese seemed poised to take over the world. Somebody needs to point out to him that Japan has been in a recession for 26 years. But it doesn't seem to matter, because as long as you're blaming somebody else, the message is very powerful. The message is very effective. And what is what is fueling this anxiety is this two-track reality. Look at the United States economy. In the last 7 years, the United States has created 14 million private sector jobs. Unemployment is now under 5%. The stock market has doubled in this presidency. Housing markets are up. Construction is up. Auto sales are up. But all these gains are being distributed quite unequally. The vast majority of the gains are going to people who have a good education and access to capital. And when you look at that reality, and versions of it are true in Europe, and to a certain extent they are even, as I say, beginning to be true in Asia, what you recognize is we are going to have some kind of significant response to the problem of the age. And the problem of the age is that technology and globalization combine to produce this two-track world, this two-track economy. And in order to change that reality, it seems to me that we have one very powerful weapon, and that is education, right? Because what you can do You can't change the nature of the world economy. You can't change the nature of technology. These things are going to continue to happen. But what you can do is try in some way to have really a dramatic shift in the education profile that people have. And you have now the technology that allows you to imagine being able to get to scale in a way that you have never been able to do before. If you look at online education, that is one interesting example of a way in which you can achieve dramatic scale that you have never been able to do. I have a friend who's a professor at Yale, Bob Shiller, won the Nobel Prize in economics. And Bob Shiller says that he taught his first course online at Yale last year. And in that course, at the end of that course, the number of people who had taken the course, I don't mean audited, I don't mean watched a few lectures, I mean took the class, watched every lecture, finished every problem set, took every test, and completed the course. The number of people who completed the course online was more in that 1 year than have taken any class that Bob Shiller has taught at Yale, all put together, for 32 years. So in that 1 year. And that, of course, is just the beginning of the promise here. But we have to start thinking big, and we have to start thinking about how we address the issue of really upgrading the entire skill set that people have. And upgrading it not just in a narrow technical sense. Of course, it's important for them to learn to code. Of course, it's important for them to understand, how to read a balance sheet. But there's something broader here, and I want to close with this, which is to recognize the importance of education in its broadest dimension and its deepest dimension, which is when you look at the Trump phenomenon, when you look at what's happening in Europe with the rise of these nationalist parties, when you look at nationalism, frankly, everywhere, from Russia to all kinds of places in the world, what you recognize is that to a certain extent, there is an element here where it is easy to tell people, to give people simple answers, especially if they do not have enough knowledge. And so you do need to strengthen the broader knowledge basis that people have. Education used to be purely a skills-based business in the old days. If you think about it, hunters and farmers and warriors would teach their children how to hunt and farm and fight. And then, actually, it was in ancient Greece that they began to experiment with a new form of education, because they created something called the city-state, the polis, and they said, we're going to have democracy, and we're going to have everybody participate in government, but if everybody's participating, we need everybody to be educated. And thus began the whole idea of a broad, general, liberal education that provides instruction in science, in arts, in humanities, in history, whatever it is. And all of that together helped create what became the distinctive advantage of the West, which was the ability to think critically, to engage in the kind of critical thinking that produced the Enlightenment, the Reformation, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and now the Post-Industrial Revolution. And that seems to me the challenge of this conference, this group, this wonderful idea that Sunny has had, to find a way to spark that kind of critical thinking, that kind of renaissance throughout the world at every level of society. It is a very ambitious goal, but the point of this conference, I think, is to think big, and so that's what I think we should be doing. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
You may be aware that we have an event tomorrow night to celebrate teachers. It's a small event that we don't really put too much effort in, which is not true. But the Global Teacher Prize ceremony takes place tomorrow night. And I don't know how much you're aware of, but what we do in December, we shortlist the top 50. And what we decided to do was to bring these 50 teachers together in a network called the Varkey Teacher Ambassadors. These teachers from last year, because it's the first year of this prize, and this year, amount to 100 teachers this year, and we'll keep on growing it over time. But 2 days prior to this conference, what we've done is create something called the VTA Leadership Summit, Please join me in thanking and welcoming the top 50 teachers of the world. Please stand up and take a bow. Very well deserved. Without further ado, I'd like to invite someone, and I say this every year about him, probably the most influential man in education policy, and I'm proud to say, an advisor to the Varkey Foundation. Please welcome Andreas Schleicher to the stage.
Thanks and good morning. Can I have my slides, please? Yeah. In this new world which Fareed has just outlined to us, education has really become the most precious resource, and we can see this everywhere. Those who are highly skilled never had the life chances they have today, but those at the bottom end of the skill distribution never paid the price in our economies they pay today. But we need to take better collective responsibility for this very precious good. Our education systems are not working. They tend to be run by those who have been reasonably well served, but we're losing huge numbers of people because they don't learn the right things or because they don't learn in the right ways. And I'm not even counting all those who don't even get access to a school. And to do better, we've got to make education everybody's business. And that's not just about how many private or charter schools we build, but about how we enable every school to shape innovative learning environments in the way in which we see that happen in the world's most advanced charter schools. The world is very fortunate to have entrepreneurs like Sunny Varkey here who make that happen. But we have to think a lot harder how we make every education leader at every level of the education system more of an entrepreneur. Look at the different rates of success of students from different social backgrounds. Here you can see the children from the 10% most disadvantaged families in Mexico, marked in red, do a lot worse than children from the 10% wealthiest families. But look at this. If you come from a similarly disadvantaged family in Chile, you're actually served less well in Chile schools than in Mexico, while Chile serves the rich kids better than Mexico does. And you can see how social background plays out quite differently across different education systems. And when you put it all together, you can see that the 10% of the most disadvantaged children in Shanghai have learned more mathematics than the 10% wealthiest kids in the United States and other countries. And that shows that poverty isn't destiny, but that many school systems fail dramatically in serving disadvantaged children. And this isn't just a question of money. In most countries in the industrialized world, we are well beyond the point in which money alone makes much of a difference. And here comes the troubling part. Some of the inequality in educational opportunity actually come by design. Because in the vast majority of countries, governments reinforce inequality by giving the wealthier kids also the better teachers and the more educational resources. You see this here by the red bars pointing upward. A very topical way to see that difference that school systems can make is actually to look at how well do our systems serve refugees, immigrants. Our PISA data show that the country where immigrants go to school actually matters a lot more than the country where they come from. And that's because of the incredible work that teachers and school leaders do every day. Here you see the learning achievements of first-generation immigrants from Turkey in a group of countries. You can see they do similarly well, roughly equally well. But if you look at how the children of Turkish immigrants, who've gone to school in their host country from day one, you can see how performance varies so significantly. First-generation children of immigrants from Turkey do similarly well in Germany and Switzerland, but in the second generation, they're almost a year ahead in Switzerland. So even if the country of origin does shape your learning outcomes, the country where you are served in school matters a lot more. Here's another way of looking at this. Refugees, immigrants from the Arab-speaking world do really well in the Netherlands, much less well in Denmark, Finland, and Qatar. But the picture looks very different when you look at social integration, which in addition to academic performance is another very, very important factor today in our societies. Finland does so-so when it comes to academic integration of refugees and immigrants, but it does really well on giving them a place where they feel at home. Denmark does so-so on academic integration and really poorly when it comes to social integration. The UAE does really reasonably well on both aspects. This is everybody's business. It's not just the work of schools and teachers, but ensuring that we integrate people who come to our countries. Because if we're having difficulties with this today, how is it going to look tomorrow? Everybody's on the move. And there are good reasons for people. We simply need to do a lot better to give people a future. Technology is another area where we have to make so much headway. The promise is absolutely huge. Now, why should students have a textbook that was designed 5 years ago when they can have access to the world's most advantaged knowledge in multiple formats with no time and space constraints? That's the world that Fareed just outlined to us. With technology, we can support new pedagogies where learners are not recipients but active participants in learning processes. We can make feedback faster and more granular, and we can create powerful networks of teachers to share and enrich teaching material. Now, that is the potential of technology. That's the potential of the education industry. But the reality is this. When you look at how the intensity of technology use in schools actually relates to the digital skills of young people, you can see how quickly the curve slopes downward. Now, for every successful example of technology use in schools, you'll find 5 unsuccessful ones. The reality is technology does more harm than good in our schools today because we have not succeeded in integrating well. And I'm not blaming this all on education policy. I think the education industry side, technology side, is having its fair share of blame as well. Many of your children would not voluntarily play with the quality of, a game that we find in our educational software every day today. There's a lot to do to bring those worlds together, the world of technology, the world of education. But the most disturbing finding is actually this. Less than 1/3 of teachers in the industrialized world find that more innovative work will be recognized and rewarded. Our schools are essentially innovation-hostile environments. And it's pretty clear that we are miles away from where we need to be. Citizens expect today that we can leverage the potential of all learners, that we better anticipate the evolution of the demand for skills. And as Fareed outlined, the world in the future is going to look very different. Have our education systems the eyes and ears to see how this world is changing. That's what it is about. That's what everybody's business is really about. Do we find more innovative solutions to what we learn, how we learn, where we learn, when we learn? And that we advance from the rather industrial work organization where teachers are just exchangeable widgets in the classroom to a much more professional work organization. And nobody has been able to go that alone. Success isn't just about a whole of government approach. That's actually the easy part. It's really a whole of society projects. We need governments, the profession, the business sector, and families working together on this. We expect governments to ensure quality, equity, efficiency in educational outcomes. And the best bet to collect a lot of taxes is, in fact, to educate your citizens well. That's easy to say, but too often we see actually governments encouraging regulatory incumbency that is actually heavily constraining innovation in our education system. It's very, very hard for innovators to get in the education space and agenda. If we would invent education from scratch today, would anyone come up with the school systems that we have today? Would anyone use the people, the spaces, the time, the technology in the ways in which we are currently doing? We need to rethink the organizational patterns that are the backbones of many schools today. The lone teacher, the classroom separated from other classrooms, each with its own teacher. The familiar class schedule, the bureaucratic units, and the very traditional approaches to teaching and classroom observation. The future is with formative organizations that grow and sustain professional and social capital. The challenge really is to make education systems more resilient to political change. And that means listening to everyone's voice. But at the same time, avoid that this becomes the consensus of the lowest common denominator, because we need to keep education responsive to new emerging demands. Surely one thing that governments can always do is to create more places. And nobody does that better than China. Over the last years, the Chinese have created about almost one university per week. And we estimate they will provide close to 1/3 of all tertiary graduates and about 40% of the world's STEM graduates in the next 15 years. Huge numbers. But producing more of the same is not going to be enough. In more and more countries, we find this toxic mix of unemployed graduates looking for a job, while at the very same time employers say they cannot find the people with the skills they need. We need government, civil society to think harder about what people need to learn, when and how. A generation ago, teachers could expect that what they taught would last for a lifetime of their students. Today, teachers need to prepare young people for more rapid change than ever before, to use technologies that have not been invented, to solve social problems that we don't yet know will arrive, to prepare them for jobs that have not been created. More importantly, education also has become about values, about providing young people with the kind of compass and navigation skills to find their own way through this increasingly complex, volatile, and ambiguous world. We need to think harder about modern knowledge. The dilemma for educators is that the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, have precisely become the kind of things that are also easy to digitize, automate, and outsource. You can solve large parts of today's schoolwork in seconds with the help of a smartphone. If we want our children to become smarter than a smartphone, we have to think harder about how we prepare them. We need to help students think across the disciplinary silos that are still in school so that they can connect the dots where the next innovation is going to come from. The modern world no longer rewards you just for what you know, but for what you can do with what you know. That's the big differentiator today. We need to help students to manage knowledge through systems thinking, design thinking, information literacy, global competency. Being able to see the world through different lenses, different perspectives, appreciate that there are different ideas, different values in our education system. That's what the modern world really is about. We need to develop modern skills such as critical thinking and problem solving, but also important social and emotional skills. And when you look at this list, you see that this requires a much broader perspective than government and schools. It's got to be everybody's business. Learning at the workplace, for example, can help people to develop soft skills on modern equipment and to learn, live, collaborate with other people. And think about the world's elite schools today. Actually, if you visit them, you find very quickly this is not about a little bit of more mathematics or a little bit of more history. Their main differentiator are character qualities. Dimensions such as mindfulness, curiosity, courage, leadership, ethics. Can we make that education now accessible to all? The kind of education that was reserved for a small elite in the past, can we make this available to all in the same way as in the Industrial Revolution we made foundation skills accessible to all? That's the big question I think we're confronting today. How are we going to deliver this learning? The real question is how we can reconfigure the space, people, time, and technology that can truly transform education. It's clear that the quality of education will never exceed the quality of teachers. And most teachers actually have a very clear view on what good teaching is about. In our Thales survey, for example, 96% of British teachers say, my role as a teacher is to facilitate or it's choir. 86% say that students learn best by finding solutions on their own. And 74% say thinking and reasoning is more important than curriculum content. That's the view of teachers. But let's compare that with what actually happens in our classrooms today. We ask our students in PISA to think about the prevalence of different approaches to teaching and learning. The oldest learning strategy is probably memorization, just absorb knowledge. So at the top of the chart, you're going to see a lot of rehearsal, routine exercises, drill, practice. At the bottom, that rarely happens. Now, if you'd imagine that British teachers all believe in a very constructivist approach to teaching, you'd imagine Britain comes out on the bottom of the list, where there is not a lot of emphasis on memorization and rote learning. But the bottom place is already taken by Switzerland, and then comes Poland, and then comes Germany. So where did Britain actually come out on this? Actually, it's the country where students report most memorization, most rote learning. Teachers say they believe in a constructivist approach, and students tell us actually what happens in my class is drill and practice. Now, if I had asked you at the beginning, which country practices most rote learning, many of you would have tipped China. No? But actually, Shanghai in China comes out somewhere in the middle. And the same is true for many of the other East Asian countries that we often stereotype as being just drill. In fact, we've also been measuring elaboration strategies. And here you can see that, yes, China does some memorization, but students in Shanghai are also very, very strong on reasoning, deep learning, critical thinking, and the solution of non-routine problems. And there are other countries too which show us you can combine memorization with other learning approaches. Why do I show you this? Because it does underline that we have too many old-fashioned beliefs of what happens in the classroom in different countries, and the world is changing. So how do different styles of teaching actually relate to learning outcomes? That's, of course, the critical question. Here's some interesting data on that. You can look at the levels of PISA proficiency from very low to very high. No? And some say that, student-oriented practices are the holy grail, personalization, getting students out into small groups and so on. But actually, when you look at the data, those practices are very good at the bottom end of the scale for low-performing students. They're not very prevalent at the high end of the skill distribution. No? So it's another type of ideology that's not borne by out the data. teacher-directed education. And some people say that's very old-fashioned, but in fact, it seems to be quite prevalent across the whole distribution. But when you look at the top end of the distribution, the highest performing students, that's where cognitive activation is prevalent. That's about giving students challenging tasks, asking them to look through different solution strategies, apply knowledge to novel situations. Huge differences. So start to rethink your stereotypes about different practices in education. The bottom line is that good teaching is about making learning central, encouraging engagement, responsibility, being acutely sensitive to individual differences, promoting continual assessment with formative feedback, being demanding for every student, and ensuring that students feel valued and included, and that learning is collaborative. And again, what this means is that teachers need to develop a wide range of knowledge and expertise. Effectiveness is always going to be demonstrated by behavior. That's the test of truth, not what you have learned, what you're actually doing, who have a really deep understanding of the content they teach, who are capable to deploy a moral pedagogical craft. And increasingly, it's also about being sensitive to different cultural and social contexts. So what can we do to help with this? Some people say, well, leave it to the school system. They just need to select the most talented teachers and we've got to solve the problem. Have a look at this. Here you see the middle half of the skills of college graduates across countries. No? And the red part shows you how teachers fare. So Japan and Finland, for example, have the most skilled graduates in the world, and they are able to attract teachers from the top end of the graduate distribution. Norway has similarly high-skilled graduates, but is not very successful in mobilizing those people to become teachers. But look at Poland. You can basically see the skills of graduates are not that strong in the total population, and Poland has real difficulties in attracting teachers from the top end of graduates, because everybody wants to have those great people. But listen to this. Poland has been one of the most rapidly improving education systems over the last decade. And that tells us, yes, it is important who you can attract, but it's so much more important what collective investment we make in the people we have. If you are just waiting for a spaceship that is going to bring you new teachers one day, you're going to be here for a long time. People typically define professionalism as the level of autonomy and internal regulation that members of an occupation have. Now, that's how we talk about professionalism. So they look whether people work mainly through external forces, prescription, looking inward, or whether the members of the profession own their practice. At the OECD, we have measured those drivers and looked at the knowledge base that teachers have, measured that. We looked at discretion teachers have over their work, and their opportunities for exchange and support. The last part is really, again, about the whole of society approach, making sure that teachers are part of the larger picture. And what the results show is that those things play out very differently across countries. In Poland, the triangle is wide. You can see basically for Poland is quite strong on all aspects. Portugal, doing not well on any aspect. Malaysia is an interesting case, very strong on peer networks. Teachers are very willing to collaborate with other teachers, but they're not so great on their knowledge base and on their professional autonomy. Italy is the converse. It's interesting that teachers can do what they like, but they lack the knowledge base, and they have no access to their peers. France is doing well on knowledge, but again, the teachers don't have much discretion over their work, and they very much work in isolation. When you put those countries together, you can actually see how professionalization plays out so differently across countries. Why do I show you this? Because that's the result of what we do with those people. The fact that those things vary so much across countries tells us, yes, policy and practice can make a huge difference in how we prepare our teachers for the challenge of tomorrow. We've scored countries on those dimensions by adding up the knowledge, autonomy, and peer network aspects. And you can see there are huge differences in teacher professionalization. Estonia, Singapore, New Zealand, doing really, really well on that. Many people consider Finland as the El Dorado for teachers, where everything is great for teachers. And I'm a great fan of the Finnish education system, don't misunderstand me. But if Finland can learn a lot from other countries when it comes to professionalism. Why? Finnish teachers do okay on knowledge, but they're actually doing quite poorly on collaboration, on peer networks. You contrast this with Shanghai. That is where peer collaboration is the major strength of the education system. And it's also the big differentiator between, for example, Finland and Estonia. That brings us closely what society can actually do about it. Look at professional collaboration. In most countries, you see a fair amount of informal collaboration among teachers. Now, teachers are very social people. But the kind of deeper professional collaboration that I'm talking about here is so much less frequent. Now, when you look at classroom observation, just 1 in 10 teachers do that frequently. There are some countries, where this is done better, where you can count them on really one hand. The East Asian countries typically stand out with their strong emphasis on professional collaboration. Teachers in Shanghai would typically teach, 16 hours, 12 hours a week. And they spend a lot of their time learning from and with other colleagues. And whenever those countries have to make a choice between a better teacher and a smaller class, they go for the better teacher. The point is, then when teachers work together in teams, they all learn from each other's techniques and practices because they finally see those practices. They are no longer hidden behind closed classrooms. The bottom line is that we need to invest far more into the professionalization of teachers. Singapore invests 100 hours of professional development into every teacher, every year. And it does pay off. You find the teachers with a low degree of professionalization actually much less involved. The more frequently teachers collaborate, the more they observe other people's classrooms, the more they take part in collaborative professional development, the more effective they feel, the more happy they are in their jobs. And again, you can see this on other dimensions reflected as well. If you have teachers with a low degree of professionalization, they don't believe in the status of teachers. They're not satisfied with their work. They don't feel effective. If you invest in your teachers, you can really see what differences makes on those kinds of outcomes. Some people say, investing in teachers and then see them leave the profession is bad. Sure. But what is surely worse is not to invest in teachers and keep them. When we talk about everybody's business, it's also very important to bring employers into the picture. Those countries which have been able to integrate the world of work and the world of learning are far better in ensuring a smooth transition from education to work. Compared to purely government-designed curricula delivered exclusively in schools, learning at the workplace allows young people to learn hard skills or modern equipment and soft skills such as teamwork, communication, collaboration in the real-world experience. And we have identified 3 factors that actually are so crucial for employer engagement and that are essential to get employers on board. It's about high-quality delivery, and that means credit-bearing and quality-assured work-based learning. You need trainers who have the pedagogical skills, but also the technical expertise to make things work. It's about reliable qualifications that reflect labor market needs and that are developed together with employers. And of course, it's about engaging employers not just in the delivery, but in the design of those programs. That's why we need to bring them on board. And crucially, we need to bring families into the picture. The PISA data show that this simple question parents ask their students at home, how was school? Had a larger impact on learning outcomes than family income. There's so much more that families can do to reach out to schools and that schools can do to reach out to families. Chinese parents invest the last money into the education of their children, their future. In the Western world, we've already spent the money of our children for our own consumption today. That tells you about a difference. The reality is that individuals incur huge returns from better education, even when you discount the direct costs of foregone earnings, tuition, and so on. You talk about several $100,000 that individuals gain more in their working life through a better education, tertiary education. Interestingly, governments earn too. They earn $100,000 more than they spent per university graduate. And that makes a powerful case for more investment, but also for a lot more creative thought on how we share the costs and the benefits of education in our societies more equitably. How do we make sure that the smartest kids and not the wealthiest kids get access to the best educational opportunities? That's what this is about. I want to conclude with a few remarks on how we can make that happen. Change is always difficult. Everyone likes reform except for their own children. Everyone has participated in education and has a view on that, and we all are like that. Implementation is so difficult to coordinate across these many layers of the administration because there are so many providers. And the fear of loss of privileges matters a lot in reform simply because of the vast education structure that means just so extensive vested interests in the system. So it's no surprise that everybody values the status quo. But education can and should do better. There's several crucial elements for successful reform delivery. It's about a shared vision, clear and consistent priorities that extend across governments, that are built by society, that everybody is working on together. That's one of the key distinguishing factors of high-performing education systems. They have created a social dialogue among everybody of what education should be about and how we deliver it. They don't leave that up to a small group of experts somewhere. It's about performance management, and that includes appropriate targets, good real-time data, regular monitoring, incentives to reward success, aligned to targets. And again, nothing will work without investing in frontline capacity. This is about building professional capabilities. It's about transferring and sharing best practice. It's about innovation. It's about managing human resources a lot more flexibly. And last but not least, it all needs to fit together in a very good delivery architecture. We're all on this together. Education is only going to succeed if we make that everybody's business. It's about creating partnerships. It's about creating connections. It's about the social, intellectual, and professional capital on which thriving school systems, learning systems actually depend. And that is even more critical when resources are scarce and when we need to do more with less. All easy to say, hard to do, but that's why we're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. The story of our foundation actually starts some 55 years ago, although in our literature it says that we're 5 years old. The Varkey family moved from South India to Dubai so many years ago. And through their enterprise, through their persistence, like Dubai, they also have grown over time, resulting in Sunny Varkey being the head of an education organization called GEMS Education, which runs a system of schools in the UAE and many other countries. Mr. Varkey is the founder of our foundation. On the 50th anniversary of his company, he decided to institute the Varkey Foundation to do good in the world beyond what he did in GEMS Education. He's a man of few words, but a man of action. Please welcome Mr. Varkey to the stage. Good luck.
Good morning. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to welcome you to the 4th Global Education and Skills Forum. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here in Dubai. Firstly, I must thank His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of UAE and the ruler of Dubai, for honoring us with this patronage of this event. It's His Highness's vision that has inspired all of us to put together this conference. We could not have done any of this without his support. I'm standing here because I want to start this conference with a simple question. Why are we meeting here today? Why are we gathered today in this room? Why have we decided that this is the most important place we can be this moment, right here, right now? We are not here just to enjoy this great city. We are not here just to enjoy the sunshine. We are not here just to get together. We are here because we have heard a call. It is a call of a child, but not just one child. It is a call of hundreds of millions of deprived children. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an invisible wall that runs through the middle of our planet. When a baby is born, which side of that wall the baby grows upon is something which falls to the hand of God. But ladies and gentlemen, what happens to that child after they are born lies in our hands. Many years ago, with great fanfare, the Millennium Development Goals were created, pledging that every child would get an education. And yet, 15 years later, 58 million children around the world still do not attend primary schools, while 500 million children are in failing schools. At the current rates of progress, it will take until 2072 to end youth illiteracy. That's several more generations who will miss out on the chance of a decent life for themselves and their families. Governments around the world came together last autumn to agree the UN Sustainable Development Goals. New targets were set with new deadlines to solve the world's greatest challenges once and for all. But I'm disappointed once again to see that education featured as goal number 4 and not at the very top. It has become a habit to treat education as a second-order issue, to be dealt after poverty has been eradicated, hunger ended, and healthcare improved. And yet, without education, none of the other goals can be achieved. There is no end to poverty without education. There is no end to disease without education. There is no solution to climate change without education. In fact, there is no hope without education. I fear that unless we make education our number 1 priority, then governments will not give it the importance that is required. We must be clear that we have a global education crisis on our hands. It may not appear on the evening news or trending on Twitter. Perhaps that is because its impact is gradual rather than dramatic. It doesn't lend itself to a simple, powerful photo that shows the suffering of its victims. But it is there a cancer slowly eating away at the futures of young people around the world. And now, a new threat to education has emerged. Conflict and chaos in the Middle East are preventing a whole generation of young people going to school. Education has been the silent casualty of the civil war in Syria. At least a quarter of the schools in Syria have been damaged or destroyed, and almost 3 million Syrian children are out of school. Every day, children are losing a day of education that they'll never get back. So far, the world's response has been totally inadequate. By starving these children of an education, we are failing to give them the skills they need to rebuild their society and possibly leaving them open to radicalization. But in spite of all this bad news, the good news is that we already know how to solve the global education crisis. Unlike the public health emergencies caused by the Zika or Ebola outbreaks, we don't have to wait until the scientists have developed a vaccine. The formula for giving every child good education is simple and proven. Teachers that are well respected, well trained, well paid. Not only must we find more money to overcome this crisis, but my belief is that by pooling our creativity, generosity, and persistence, we can collectively overcome this education crisis. We need to take greater collective responsibility for the situations we are in and work together to banish this injustice once and for all. But we won't make progress unless we do one important thing. We must treasure teachers. Teachers build a bridge from the present to the future, taking us from where we are to where we want to be, turning our dreams into reality. They bring us hope, opportunity, and self-respect. Two years ago, I launched the Global Teacher Prize. I said that I wanted to shine a spotlight on great teachers and raise the status of the profession. I am delighted to say that this initiative has received the full support of the UAE and other governments. And with the support of His Holiness Pope Francis, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President Clinton, UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova, and Bill Gates, we have made great progress. This year's winner of the Global Teacher Prize will be announced this weekend. But I would like every teacher and every school around the world to know that the Global Teacher Prize celebrates all of them and the great work they do every single day. I want to personally thank you and all the teachers for the great work you do. My hope is that children from around the world will watch Sunday's ceremony and think about what their own teachers do for them. I want to incite them and inspire them to take up teaching as a profession. And perhaps next year, they will nominate their own teacher. This conference provides a unique opportunity. Education, the key to solving the world's problems, has never been at the top of global intrigue. But if we work together, government, business, and civil society, we have it in our power to finally give every child their birthright. a good education. Over the next few days, I ask you all to dig deep. Use every ounce of your knowledge, talent, dedication, and experience to make the global education crisis history. Remember, whatever the question, education is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. When he does talk, he has something to say. Thank you very much, Chairman. I've been remiss in not recognizing a few of our organizational partners, and I want to put that right straight away. The first is His Excellency Dr. Abdullah Karam of the Knowledge and Development Authority of Dubai. I also, if I'm not mistaken, Professor Xu, Tsinghua University of China. And because this is a global conference, we go from China to Asia, we also go to Africa. We have the African Union Commission as one of our partners too. No event is possible today without financial resources, so I'm delighted that we have a few sponsors for this event. And I want to also mark out this moment to thank them. They are All Prints, SKS, GEMS Education, Arc Skills, the Education Partners, and Mashreq Bank. Please thank them too. As someone who's a stickler for programming and timing, we are a little bit over time. I want to give two notices before we conclude this particular plenary. The first is that you will have had the opportunity to look at the app that's been developed for the event. A lot of notices will be coming through the app throughout the day. Please download it. If you don't use it, you won't know what the main sessions are. You'll find it difficult to get messages. So please take the opportunity to download this app and look at it from time to time. There are notifications, just like you get on Facebook, that will come through that will alert you of various things that are happening. The second logistical piece of information is when we finish over here, we have a set of panels, and we also have an exciting workshop that's being organized by Lego. If you follow the blue carpet, you will get to them quite quickly. So remember, follow the blue carpet. This conference, like I said to you, has a number of different formats. And there's a few different things that are happening this year, which I think I should tell you about. The first is that we obviously have panel discussions. We're all accustomed as we go to conferences and events to seeing panel discussions. But this year, what we've done is we've got two new formats. One is a debate format, an Oxford University Union debate format, where you have a motion and two teams argue out a motion. And you have the opportunity to cast your votes in support of or against these motions at the end. I'd like to encourage you to go to the debates. I think they will be a big differentiator to this conference. The second, given that we have these phenomenal teachers from around the world, and this year we have the top 10 from this year who are also here, they will be taking teacher masterclasses so that we understand what makes them so special. I'd like to encourage you to go to the teacher masterclasses. And you have a wide array of teachers, so ranging from America, you have a teacher from the UK, you have teachers from Palestine, from Kenya, from Japan, and you will get to learn what makes them so special, whether it's their philosophy of teaching, whether it's their practice, and how they approach their craft. In an education conference, it seems daft to say, but it's great to have teachers here, so let's make the most of them. Tonight, we have a cultural festival, and I'd like to encourage all of us to come to that. We've gone to a lot of effort to make sure that we get and we showcase the arts in education. So we have a poetry jam, we have some musicians, and we are also screening a film produced by Girls Rising so that we understand what the situation on girls' education is also. Please do join us tonight. Thank you all once again. We look forward to a great conference.